What's up, pagan people? Drew here. And I want to warn you in advance that this video might get a little long and it might be all over the place because I have so many thoughts about this topic. And I actually have, oh gosh, several pages of notes here, but I still don't know if I'm not going to just... Even my notes are kind of convoluted, so we're just going to try to get through this. So I don't know, like 3 or 4 weeks ago-ish, I was chatting with a few of my fellow sister witches and friends, and the topic of the Wheel of the Year popped up. and this conversation kind of started this whole stream of thought that just like poured out of me. So I'm going to try to articulate that here on my channel because it relates to the kind of thing I talk about on my channel. And of course, this is my channel. These are my thoughts, so why not? So the Wheel of the Year typically is significant to most modern practitioners, pagans and witches. But I find that the way that we relate to the wheel can vary widely from practitioner to practitioner. And I find this interesting. While I've made this observation before, it became apparent as we were all talking that this was true amongst us. And it just got me thinking about why. Why do we all relate to the wheel so differently? Now, granted, when you're talking about specific individuals, you're going to get specific answers. But I kind of went in a broader, just sort of generalized thought process with this. And this is what happened. So I'll be talking a bit about my own specific, obviously these are my own specific thoughts, but I'm mainly going to be talking in generalities throughout this video. So first, I want to say that I do feel that it is important to sort of research, study, and try to understand as much as is possible where these concepts, festivals, and celebrations originated from, what they represented, and why they were a thing. I say as much as possible because in this video, I'm going to be referring to the Celts just because it's sort of the go-to, the easy, oh yeah, the Celts. But there are others. There's like Germanic tribes. There's other cultures and peoples who fall into the category, but it'll just be easier, save me time to just say the Celts. So the Celts did not keep written history. They didn't write down what they were doing, right? Any written record we have of what they were doing comes from outside their culture. So these are outside observers, and they may or may not have a clear understanding of what's going on. And, it could be totally unintentional misunderstanding, but there could also be cases where it is complete fabrication because they have their own biases or their own prejudices against what's going on, their own ideas about what's going on. So you kind of have to take what we believe we understand about these cultures and what they did with a little grain of salt, because we can't know 100%. We just can't. Having said that, I do still think it's important to try to understand as much as possible what it was they were doing and why they were doing it, if we're going to continue in that vein. But I do not believe that it is necessary for any given practitioner to practice, to celebrate and understand and relate to the Wheel of the Year and its Sabbats exactly as we believe they did then. And I actually believe it could be detrimental in some cases to do so. When I say detrimental, what I mean is it could be very limiting to an individual on their path to try to strictly adhere to what it's believed the ancient Celts did in their practices, the ancients, whoever they are, in their practices with regards to anything, but we're talking about the wheel, with regards to the Wheel of the Year, as it may not fit, and it could hinder someone's potential and their potential relationship with the wheel. Well, I'll get further into that probably as we go on. I do want to talk about why I feel that the wheel is significant in my own practice. First off, the most beautiful and magical thing about celebrating the wheel to me is the liminal connections that it creates. There is this soft in-between space that happens during ritual and celebrations like this. And for me personally, when I'm standing in that space, I am connecting with everyone who has ever done the same thing at the same time in the past, everyone who is doing the same thing at the same time in this present moment, and everyone who will do the same thing at the same time in the future. And I'm connecting with myself. If it's Ostara, it's the spring equinox. I am in ritual and I am connecting in that space. I am with myself in that moment. I am with myself from the year before and the year before that. And not just myself, anybody who is, has, or will be doing that same thing on that day, on the spring equinox, ever. That's what happens to me when I get in that space. And that's the most magical, beautiful thing to me about the Sabbats in the Wheel of the Year. Which brings me to the significance of it, really, is this cyclical nature of it. And when I'm talking about the cyclical nature of the wheel, I'm talking about something bigger and smaller than that, actually. All the cycles that touch. Because for me, everything is related, right? So we're talking about existence, these universal cycles. And I'm talking about earth and natural cycles, which relate very closely to the wheel, right? It is what the wheel is about. But then I'm also talking about like human cycles. So, psychological, emotional life cycles of a human being, because all of these relate and are interconnected in my mind. So when we're talking about the universal cycles, we're talking about like the earth in rotation around the sun and, the roughly 365 day rotation of year that it takes to get around, or the 24-hour cycle based on how we rotate and how we're sitting on our axis in relation to the sun. And just as the earth has its rotation, its cycle, so do all the other planets. And then, there are other galaxies and, there's a much larger cycle happening. And even though we are not consciously aware of this on a daily basis, the year is going by, but we're not every day thinking about where we are in rotation to the sun, right? Where we are in our cycle around the sun. But it still has a huge impact, a great impact on our lives, our daily lives even though it's not a conscious thing. And so let's bring it back down to the planet again and talk about Earth again. An individual's behavior and their thought processes will be greatly impacted and influenced by their geography, where they are, and by the climate of that geography. So again, even if we're not consciously thinking about it, these cycles of nature are greatly influencing who we are, how we behave, how we interact with the world, what we do, what have you. So even if unconscious, these cycles are extremely important. Now, I would argue that becoming conscious of them, becoming aware of cycles, and then pulling them into the consciousness and trying to understand them would be hugely beneficial for all of us when we can do this. Obviously, doing so can help us move into harmony with the cycles. They can also give us a deeper insight, not only to psychological and emotional, but even physical states within ourselves or others. The example I'm going to use is the menstrual cycle. Yay, menses. This is a universal truth, right? In general, speaking in generalities, women have a menstrual cycle. But when you want to get into specifics of how we all relate to our menstrual cycle, it can be hugely different from each individual to each individual. Our experience of this universal truth can be quite different. And through medical, scientific exploration and growth and expansion and innovation, we have learned to understand this cycle, right? There was a time when a woman's hysterical uterus could get her thrown into a mental hospital and given ice baths and shock treatment. She could also get off on murder in trial due to hysterical uterus as well at one point. These things are ridiculous, right? We have a much deeper, a much better grasp and understanding of the menstrual cycle today. And by understanding that cycle, we are better able to move through it and to treat the symptoms and the side effects of it. And more importantly than that, we understand what's happening to us. So we are better able to make decisions to navigate the situation in a way that is hopefully best for everyone involved. Right? I can relate this back to the wheel if we're talking in generalities. The wheel is a thing, but how any individual relates to it will be different. Again, we have this universal truth, but when you break it down, it varies the experience of it between individuals. I think this is probably true, in my experience at least, with all cycles. I want to talk about the cycle of adolescence. As human beings, there are general truths about adolescence, regardless of gender, race, geography, or socioeconomics. But still, our adolescence is just that. It's our own. And thus our experience of it can vary widely. In this way, the factors that I'm touching on this video are true for all of these cycles. Like they affect, or at least have the potential to affect, any cycle. So obviously the wheel fits in there as well. So when we're talking about the wheel of the year, these traditions, ideas, and beliefs all originate from very specific geographies, societal structures, economics, and timeframes, which are all very different than your modern practitioner's experience. There are, of course, going to be exceptions to this rule. There are places in this world where people are practicing a tradition from their culture that is very similar to the way it was hundreds and hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago even. But in general, your average practicing pagan or witch or both, their experience of these things is going to be greatly different than the experience of the ancient Celts, for example. The cultures from which these practices, ideas, traditions, what have you, originate. In general, we do not live as they did, right? So we do not practice the way they would have. Originally, there were specific groups of people, and they had very specific beliefs, practices, ideas, and traditions held within these groups. These people, they lived, they toiled, they worshiped, suffered, and prospered together very closely. It was very intimate. For the most part, we don't have that today. And you may disagree with that idea. And again, there are going to be exceptions to this rule, but in general, it's just reality, right? The ancient Celts couldn't walk into the local metaphysical shop and buy their favorite incense or hop on Amazon and order activated charcoal. Like that just wasn't a reality for them, where it is for us. And that's just one general example of this. Another reality of this modern age is that we are far more solitary in our practices. And I'm not just talking about witchcraft, I'm talking about anything that falls under this sort of neo-pagan umbrella. Even those practitioners who do belong to covens or groves or other magical, witchy groups, they admit that they are, at their essence, a solitary practitioner who is coming together for working in group. The structure is completely different. We have these much larger, more removed communities and societies today where they're full of people who have different ideas, beliefs, dreams, morals, and goals. Whereas with the ancient Celts, they laughed together, they cried together, they ate together, they lived and died together very closely. Even if they were a larger community, it wasn't New York City, right? I've come to the conclusion that there are many contributing factors, speaking generally and of course even more specifically, that could influence and color the way that any individual might interact with the wheel of the year and the individual Sabbats. So again, I'm going to speak in generalities, but social structures and economic status could potentially play a role in how any individual or group of people relate to the wheel of the year. Speaking in generalities and extremes, a rich person, a very rich person, and a very poor person have very different experiences of everyday life. An example would be the commercialized holiday season. Someone who has no worry about money is going to have a very different experience of providing holiday gifts for their children than someone who is constantly worried about money all the time. Also, retirement is going to look very different for these two extremes, right? And while I don't know if how we relate to the wheel is hugely impacted by these factors, it's at least a potential. I can see the winter solstice, for example, not being the greatest time of year for some people, and thus making it more difficult. And we're not even talking about, there's a lot of things, births and deaths and things that's more specific. I'm just speaking in generalities. But I can also see the opposite. I can see that someone whom doesn't have the greatest economic resources really delving into handcrafting very personal, intimate gifts for their loved ones, while someone who is very well off and has no concern about finance, just handing off gift cards to everyone and saying, go buy whatever you want. And those being two very different experiences of that Sabbath as well. Not here to judge whether one is good and one is bad, just different, very different. Another factor that I kind of touched on already, but it seems to me that could affect how one might relate to the wheel pretty strongly would be geography, and more importantly, climate of that geography. Touching a bit on the social status, the societal aspect of this, and then leaning into the geography. So the smaller section of this category, if you will, of discussion, being the societal influence. Of course, there is a potential for us to be influenced by the social structures and community that we were raised in, the thoughts, the ideas, and the traditions that are played out in the society that we are raised in, the values of our society, the culture that we're raised in. All of these things also, of course, influence us and have some sort of impact, or at least potential impact, on how we relate to the wheel. The actual physical geography possibly could, but to me, that seems like that would lean more into the climate created by the geography. So like if you're in the mountains, it'd be very different than the desert, so on and so forth. Again, I have to remind myself that these traditions came from a very specific place, a very specific climate. I'm going to use Brittany of Palm Tree Bewitchery and Ashley Michelle, as well as Trish from Beanbag Hagwag and Dana from the Shadow Moon Witch as my examples here. Imbolc. The Sabbath of Imbolc is experientially very different for these four witches, the two groups. Brittany and Ashley Michelle are in Florida, and Trish and Dana are in Minnesota. So when Imbolc comes, it looks very differently to them. Now, I'm not saying that they can't relate to the Sabbath as it is in a similar fashion. I'm just saying their experience of the Sabbath, celebrating it, that just the geography and climate of where they are is extremely different. I know for a fact that for Trish, for example, Imbolc is kind of like a life preserver being thrown to her. And she's like, okay, we just need to hold on a little bit longer. Spring is coming. Whereas for Brittany and Ashley Michelle, it's already very spring-like where they are. I happen to live on the southern eastern coast of North Carolina. And for me, Imbolc is very what Imbolc should be. The very first stirrings of spring. It's very in line with what the Sabbath represents. The climate is in line with it, right? So I have to think that the way that they feel about these Sabbaths and relate to these Sabbaths at least has the potential to be drastically different, simply because of the climate where they live. Now, I'm not speaking for these witches and how they relate to the wheel. I'm just using them as examples to show how climate could potentially affect the way any given individual or group of people living in a specific area may relate to the wheel of the year. And the last thing that comes to my mind that impacts how we relate to the wheel of the year would be simply time frame. We are in the 21st century and we have all of our creature comforts. We have central air and heating, most of us. Again, there are going to be exceptions, but in general, there's central air and heating for your modern practitioner. We have travel is such a different thing. We can hop on an airplane and fly to a whole different country. Modern technology of all sorts, our phones and computers and televisions and what have you. These things certainly don't bring us any closer to the cycles of nature. So again, a general statement here, but most of your modern practitioners are not growing all of their own food, vegetable, fruit, that kind of thing, herbs. They may grow, I grow fruit and vegetables and herbs. I don't grow them all though. Your average practitioner is not going to either hunt, catch, or raise all of their own meat for eating. Again, there are probably exceptions to this rule, but in general, we're not doing that. And honestly, even if we were, if our crop were to fail, or if we were unable to catch enough meat or to hunt enough, there's a disease going through and it kills all the livestock and all the wildlife in the area. I don't know, like whatever might happen, we'd still be okay because we can hop in our car and drive down to our local grocery store. The ancient Celts could not do that. We are removed from the land in a way that our ancestors were not. Now, granted, as pagans, most of us make a conscious, concerted effort to be more in touch with nature. Absolutely. But we're still living in our air-conditioned house on our cell phone, watching TV, playing on our tablet, whatever. Like we still are very much modern human beings. And when I'm talking about like modern convenience and modern technology, I'm not just talking about smartphones and tablets. I'm talking about modern medicine, the way our modern societies are structured as a result of modern technology. Let's not forget climate change. These are all things that would be extremely foreign and alien to the ancient Celts if they were to be popped down in the middle of it today. We live in a completely foreign world to pagans, ancient pagans. I guess really the whole like gist of this, like summing up, if there is such a thing, the thought process is that if you want to absolutely adhere to what we believe the ancient pagans did with their rituals and practices and what their traditions and their thoughts and ideas and beliefs were about the wheel of the year and the specific Sabbats, then that's wonderful. Absolutely do that. But if that doesn't resonate with you, that's okay too. Again, this is it's not the greatest analogy, but I have so much respect for my great-grandma, my great-great-grandma, my great-great-great-grandma, and the fact that they had to create every meal they did from scratch with limited tools, and they had to wash all the clothes by hand, and all of their toil that led to the innovation into my modern conveniences. I'm all about it. Thank you so much. I respect you and love you, but I will happily go into my kitchen and use my stick blender and my washer and dryer. And, I am very happy to have my modern conveniences. I don't think that me using my modern conveniences in my daily life detracts or takes anything away from what my ancestors did, my great-grandmothers did. I don't feel that one negates the other, is what I'm trying to say. So, point being, we're modern pagans in a modern world and modern witches. And the way that any one of us, relate to the wheel of the year is from a modern perspective, as well as an economic or geographic, there's so many factors that could come into play. So I don't think we should beat ourselves up and try to make ourselves fit a mold that wasn't made for us. It wasn't made for us. Again, if you can and you do, that's wonderful. But if you can't and you don't, that is fine. Now, briefly, just want to talk about my own personal evolution with the wheel. When I first started practicing witchcraft, I celebrated every single Sabbath, and I probably did that for the first 5 years. And then finally I was just like, why am I forcing myself? Because the ones that don't resonate, it started to feel like a chore. Why am I making myself do this? So I stopped, and I only celebrated the ones that deeply resonated within me. For me personally, this is the equinoxes, the solstices, and Samhain. I don't really get Imbolc or Bealtaine, Linasa a little bit. Intellectually, Like, I understand them. I understand them. I understand what they're about, why they're there. But they just don't line up with me at all. I don't feel it. Like, when I'm in my sweet spot in ritual during my solstices or equinoxes or even Samhain, like, there is magic happening all around me and inside me. And I don't get that with the others for whatever reason. But last year, I challenged myself to once again celebrate each and every Sabbath. And I filmed them and put them on my channel because that was a way to make sure that I did it. And I absolutely enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, every minute of it. But it still only reinforced in me how much more I resonate with the ones I resonate with and how I don't with the ones I don't. And moving forward, honestly, I don't have any ideas about how I'm going to celebrate the Wheel of the Year. It's just going to happen organically. That's what I've decided. I did not celebrate in bulk. I will absolutely be celebrating Ostara because it is one that I am passionate about. If I didn't celebrate any of them, I would definitely still celebrate spring and fall equinox. But regardless, I'm just going to let it happen and I'm not going to worry about it and I'm not going to think about it. And this isn't me trying to justify that. Honestly, it's not, because I came to peace with this a long time ago. It was just me trying to genuinely understand why there seems to be so much discrepancy between witches. Not in a negative way, but just, as far as how they resonate with the Wheel of the Year and how they celebrate. So, stuff just happened in here and now I'm giving it to you. Anyway, I don't think that any of this is overly profound or, whatever. It's just my thoughts. And if you listened this far in, thank you. If not, well, and if you have any thoughts that you want to share on the topic, I would love to hear them. And I am sure I only scratched the surface as far as this topic goes, but that's what I've got right now. So that's what we're going with. And yeah, I'm going to stop talking. So until next time, much love and gratitude.